Historical evidence for Jesus outside the Bible. Number 1 on the list, Thallus, 52 AD. Thallus, an early secular writer, is cited by Julius Africanus for his observations on events surrounding Jesus' crucifixion. His writing included a fearful darkness enveloping the world at the time of Jesus' death, noted a significant earthquake occurring at the time of crucifixion. Despite Thallus' original work being lost, Julius Africanus' reference supports these supernatural occurrences. 2. Tacitus, 56, 120 AD. Cornelius Tacitus, a renowned Roman historian, mentioned Jesus in his Annals, 116 AD, while discussing Emperor Nero's response to the Great Fire of Rome. Tacitus records includes that Jesus lived in Judea, that he was crucified under Pontius Pilate, and lastly, his followers were persecuted. Tacitus's records confirm key details about Jesus' life and the early Christian community. 3. Mara Bar-Serapion, after 70 AD. Mara Bar-Serapion, a Syrian philosopher, wrote a letter to his son comparing Jesus to other persecuted philosophers. He referred to Jesus as the wise king. Mara Bar-Serapion highlighted Jesus' wisdom and the consequences faced by those who persecuted him.
You see, the major problem when they claim that this is extra-biblical proof that Jesus existed is that they don't separate the idea of the biblical version of Jesus existing and possibly a historical person that the biblical Jesus is based off of. Simply because you have someone who may have been known, that does not necessarily mean that that person has done all the miracles and that's an attestament to the miracles actually happening. Now, as far as the people that they are saying here, the first one, Thallus. Very rarely do people try to pull Thallus out, mainly because we have zero writings of Thallus. We have people claiming to be quoting him, and the person, Saint Julius of Africanus, Julius Africanus, who is supposed to be quoting him, is one of the early Christian fathers. So when you look at the fact that this is being written by one of the early Christian fathers who already has a bias towards the proof, believing in this Bible, and not necessarily someone who is just looking for empirical data, but is looking to prove the validation of his God, and he is quoting him, he is supposedly quoting Thallus over 100 years later, meaning that Thallus supposedly wrote in and around 59. Now, if he wrote in and around 59, it is very plausible that then Thallus could have been or would have been alive, or at least possibly been an adult during the time frame of Jesus' crucifixion and writing about the skies turning dark and so on and so forth. But since there are zero writings from Thallus to be able to prove that this is actually what Thallus said, then you're taking the word of somebody who's writing 100 years later to say this is what Thallus wrote, but it can't be checked. It couldn't be checked then, it can't be checked now. It's somebody just quoting what somebody else believed. That would be like if I said that I have a letter that I received from Martin Luther King while he was in jail, and in the letter he blurted out racial slurs. Now, you would probably say he didn't do that because of the character that you know of the other letters that we have from Dr. King, right? But since we have no other writings of Thallus, you cannot identify what the personality of Thallus was. And you only have this one quotation from Thallus. So you can't necessarily say that this is true because you can't validate it in any form or fashion. Now, the rest of the people that he talked about, none of them wrote at the time frame of Jesus. They're all writing 100, 200 years later. Everything that they're saying is basically what people were believing at that time. It's not necessarily saying Tacitus knew Jesus. He didn't. He's writing what people believed in 100 years after Jesus supposedly walked. He's talking about how Rome had already began persecuting this cult of Christianity. And so that does not validate that this Jesus existed, or that the Bible version of Jesus existed, the miracle Jesus existed, because they're writing about what people believed. And when you're writing about what people believe, then you don't have to have evidence. There's no need for evidence because it's merely belief and nothing more. So none of those other writers are proof because they're all just writing about what people believed somebody to be, no more, no less. So therefore, it is not extra biblical proof. And here's the thing about miracles. If you want me to believe in, no, who said it? Carl Sagan said something to the effect. For extraordinary, in order for me to believe in extraordinary events, then I need extraordinary evidence. And just waking up and I got breath and there's a tree and all, that's not extraordinary. That's natural. I was born into that natural world. If your God was so interested in proving himself as he was in the Old Testament, he gave extraordinary evidence, right? Separating the Red Sea, plagues, and turning water to blood, and causing the sun to sit still in the middle of the day for 12 more hours. Extraordinary evidence of his existence. But yet, none of those things exist today. Therefore, until I see such, I shall not accept it as such. And just because somebody wrote something down, if that's your understanding, if that's your acceptance, then at the same time I can say that, well, it's written and recorded in the Iliad and the Odyssey. At least people like Alexander the Great had coins minted and built cities, even though most of the writings about him were much later. But here's the thing, we're going to talk about this in more detail in about an hour when we go live. So y'all have a great day, and remember always, you have to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibration.